Hello, I'm John David Ebert, and welcome to our lecture course on understanding contemporary art. This is our 5th week. This week what I want to do is examine the works of two artists, Yanis Kounellis and Christian Boltanski. Christian Boltanski is a French artist. Yanis Kounellis is an Italian artist who came out of Rome, especially associated with the Arte Povera movement. Technically, I've been pronouncing it Arte Povera. Technically, it's Arte Povera, but I prefer the mispronunciation. It's easier to say. So I'm going to stick with Arte Povera. He was associated with that movement in the 60s and 70s. That movement gets going along about 1967 in an exhibition that was organized by Germano Salant. But we'll get to that. What I want to do in this video is a brief sort of introductory flyby to Italian art of the immediately after World War II, to sort of understand the matrix that produced Kounellis's work. And I think going through these three artists that I want to look at here, Piero Manzoni and Lucio Fontana and Alberto Burri, will give us a sense of the matrix that produced the work of Kounellis so we can understand where he's coming from. What I want to do is get right to the art here since there's a lot of it. This is Piero Manzoni's Achrome from 1958, so we'll begin with Manzoni. Manzoni, as we'll see, is somewhat of a trickster. This figure, or this painting rather, was part of Manzoni's attempt to get rid of narrative in painting. He wanted to purify his canvases of all narrative content, and that includes color. So he got rid of all the colors, and this is called achrome. And the canvas is soaked in something called kaolin, which is a kind of a white clay that the Chinese use in making porcelain. And it gives it a nice, interesting feel, a nice texture. He's eliminated narrative content, certainly, but not the sense of the haptic, tactile sense of touch. In this little work here, we can begin to see his trickster quality beginning to come through. This is his egg with thumbprint from 1960. What Manzoni did was make a series of hard-boiled eggs, and he put his thumbprint on each of these eggs, and he ate a number of them, but he also gave away a number of them also. And he began to have this idea that anything that came into contact with an artist or anything that an artist did or said could be considered a work of art. And so the logical extension of this goes right into his famous artist's shit, which he produced in a series of 90 cans in 1960-61. Supposedly he canned his own feces here, although we've never been sure because the cans for the most part have not been opened. And x-rays are indeterminate, so we're not sure exactly what's in these cans, but reputedly it's his own feces. And he sold each can for its market weight in gold at that time. And essentially it was a response to his father telling him, his father worked in a canning factory, and his father told him that his art was no better than shit. So basically Manzoni literalized that and produced these cans of artist's shit. Very much, I think, in the tradition of Marcel Duchamp, especially his urinal. This is a logical sequel to the urinal, and I think if anyone can be said to be the direct inheritor of the legacy of Marcel Duchamp, then it would be Piero Manzoni. This is his Base of the World from 1961. He made a series of bases with little footsteps on them, so that a person could step up onto it and become a living work of art simply by standing on this pedestal. Here what he's done is to take the same idea, take the pedestal and turn it upside down and put the earth on top of it, essentially, so that the earth now is on this pedestal and has become the world's largest work of art. And because it has become a gigantic work of art now, the artist has been rendered superfluous. In a certain sense, indeed, the Earth had been rendered a work of art. By 1957, that's the date when Sputnik goes around the Earth, thereby putting the Earth on the inside of a mechanical environment, a man-made environment for the first time, and essentially transforming it into a planetary scale work of art. So Manzoni was not far off. Now we'll switch to, Manzoni dies in 1963, so he was nearing the end of his career there. Lucio Fontana is the next artist I want to look at. He was born in 1899 and died in 1968. But it's the last 2 decades of his career where he begins to produce his most interesting works. And the works, he sort of began as a modernist, but these later works begin to shift him out of modernism and into, very firmly, I think, into contemporary art. He did a whole series of these works, which he called spatial concepts. Fontana was the founder, or one of the founders of Italian spatialism, Spazialismo. And this is called Spatial Concept Bread from 1950, in which he's taken a piece of terracotta and he's punctured holes into it. And at first it looks sort of meaningless and irrelevant. You're not sure what to make of it, but Fontana was interested in piercing the canvas and opening it up to reveal the infinity that lies beyond it. And this becomes more clear with his famous slash paintings, which aren't actually paintings at all. This is an unpainted canvas where he's taken a razor blade. This is Spatial Concept Waiting from 1960, where he's taken a razor blade and simply made a slash mark, and then he's put black wash behind the canvas on the other side in order, he said, so that it would indicate a sense of the infinite. What he wanted these basic slashes to represent was something primordial, almost like the Heideggerian rift or the abyss, the primordial act, which for Fontana was simultaneously an act of both creation and destruction, a destructive act of slashing the canvas that at the same time evokes one of the most primordial, the sort of vaginal cleft from out of which new things might come. It also, though, evokes, I think, the famous wound in the side of Christ. This is Hans Memling's rendition of it, The Man of Sorrows from 1475 or thereabouts, in which we can see the side wound there that has been pierced by the spear of Longinus when he was up on the cross. But it's also meant to represent the sort of appropriation of the vaginal powers, such as Adam had in his side when he gave birth to Eve. That's a sort of vaginal image. When the rib is taken out, it's as though he were giving birth to Eve from his side, and that is what the side wound is originally meant to represent. But in the Middle Ages, it was in the medieval period, it was turned into a kind of fetish. And here we see from a Psalter book, a Psalter and Prayer book from 1349, that the wound has been rendered as though it were its own fetish, and it looks very vaginal. So I think there's something of this in Fontana's images, or his anti-images. This is another one of Fontana's representations, Spatial Concept from 1960, in which we have a whole series of slashes now, each attendant with its own sense of waiting, its own sense of expectation and hope that something new would happen. And this is the last one I want to show from Fontana. This is The End of God, a series of sort of egg-like canvases that he did in 1963, that he painted and have a certain kind of quality of like a primordial landscape with little volcanic elements and ruptured craters and such. And the egg shape itself suggests the myth of the in utero myth of the creation from out of the cosmic egg. The Big Bang essentially comes out of a cosmic egg, but there are ancient myths of an egg hatching and the top half of it becoming the heavens and the bottom half becoming the earth and so forth. So Fontana is evoking all of these sort of cosmic mysteries. Then moving along to our next artist here, this is Alberto Bori, and I think of these three artists, Bori gives us the most of the sense of being the progenitor of Janus Cunelis. He works with a lot of the same materials. This is Sacking in Red from 1954. Bori got out of the war. He was in a concentration camp actually in Texas, or a prisoner camp in Texas, and then came out of the war and then began sewing these burlap sacks together. And the burlap sacks are something that are used by Cunelis. You see him using that quite a lot. The red may refer to blood, it may not. Bori denies this. And then in this one we have Plastic Combustion from 1958. I had mentioned Anselm Kiefer as using a blowtorch as something new in art. And of course, Kiefer wasn't the first to use a blowtorch, but the artist using the blowtorch is a new constitutive feature of contemporary art. Alberto Buri was using it in these canvases here where he was burning plastic with a blowtorch. And about the same time, Yves Klein was doing his combustion paintings, his fire paintings, in 1960, right about this time. But I think Bori was doing them before Klein. And here is Alberto Bori using another medium, iron. He's got iron sheets put together here. This is from 1960, and we'll see Cunelis using metal quite a bit. For Cunelis, his canvas is metal, metal sheets. And here is a great one from Alberto Bori. This is 1963, Rosso Plastica, where he's actually taken plastic, taken a blowtorch, and simply blown holes into it. And it gives a nice feel to it, a nice, interesting sense of the texture is very haptic. You want to reach out and touch it. And it is very strikingly beautiful. You wouldn't think that it would be for the kinds of materials that Bori was using. But Bori is also paving the way for arte povera in the sense that the arte povera movement begins using common, average, everyday materials, found objects, found materials, things that are used in average daily life. And there's a very anti-capitalist slant to Arte Povera as well. This is another one from Buri, 1975, Bianco Creto, white cracked earth, essentially, is what it is. He was inspired by some photographs that he had seen, sub-Saharan photographs of a drought that he had seen of some lakes dried up. And so he appropriates the earth here as a surface of inscription, and it's essentially a wasteland motif. It's the earth as a wasteland. And he does a whole series of these. Some of them are black. And you can see, of course, again, the influence of Buri on Kiefer, because in some of Kiefer's later works, he does also appropriate the cracked earth motif, the wasteland motif in his canvases. And Kiefer resembles Buri in another respect, too. Buri did something similar to La Rabote here. He bought a town, essentially Ghibellina, in 1968 that was destroyed by an earthquake, and he transformed it into a work of land art, the Grande Creto, that he built in the 1980s by covering it with concrete in a giant version of his cracked earth paintings. And so he turns the whole town into this sort of wasteland motif, which is essentially something similar to Kiefer buying the silkworm factory and turning it into his Gesamtkunstwerk at La Rabote. And so that we'll stop there. That gives us a sense of the Italian matrix that produced Janus Cunellus, whose works we'll then begin to move into next.